Between loyalty and lies, in the quaint town of Willow Bend, nestled between rolling hills and shimmering lakes, there lived a man named Ethan Merrick. A carpenter by trade, his hands were calloused from years of shaping wood into intricate forms. Yet his heart was soft and unwavering in its devotion to his wife, Clara. Clara, with her raven-black hair and eyes that sparkled like the morning dew, had been the love of Ethan's life since they met at the village fair a decade ago. But where Ethan found contentment in simplicity, Clara yearned for more. She often spent her days wandering through the market, her laughter ringing out like silver bells as she charmed merchants and townsfolk alike. Her vivacious spirit, which once captivated Ethan, began to draw the attention of another. That other was Adrian Locke, a traveling merchant with a silver tongue and a penchant for danger. He arrived in Willow Bend with a caravan of exotic goods, silks from the east, spices from distant lands, and stories of adventure that enraptured Clara's restless heart. Adrian's gaze lingered too long on Clara, and she found herself drawn to the allure of his world, a world so different from the one she shared with Ethan. Their affair began in shadows. Whispers exchanged beneath the willow tree by the lake, fleeting touches hidden by the bustle of the market, and secret rendezvous cloaked by the veil of night. Clara told herself it was harmless, a stolen escape from the monotony of her life. But lies have a way of festering, and guilt crept in like an unwelcome guest. Ethan, though humble, was no fool. He noticed Clara's distant eyes, the late returns home, and the faint scent of unfamiliar spices on her clothes. He chose to say nothing at first, hoping against hope that his suspicions were unfounded. But the seeds of doubt took root, and he could not ignore the ache in his heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan followed Clara. He watched from the cover of shadows as she met Adrian by the old stone bridge. Their laughter, once his solace, now cut him like a blade. Yet, instead of storming into the scene, Ethan waited, his mind swirling with pain and resolve. The next day, Ethan approached Clara. "I know," he said simply, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I know about Adrian." Clara's breath hitched, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Ethan, Why, Clara?" he interrupted, his voice breaking. Was my love not enough? Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to find the words. "It wasn't about love," she whispered. I lost myself somewhere along the way. Adrian made me feel alive, but it was fleeting. A mirage." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and anguish. "You had a choice, Clara, and you chose lies over loyalty." Clara reached for him, but he stepped back. "I need time," he said, "to decide if this is a wound we can heal or a scar that will remain forever." Weeks passed, and Adrian left Willow Bend, his charm no match for the storm that followed. Clara devoted herself to earning back Ethan's trust, her every action a plea for forgiveness. Ethan, torn between the love he still held and the betrayal that haunted him, wrestled with his decision. In the end, Ethan chose to forgive, not because the pain had vanished, but because he believed in the possibility of redemption. Clara, humbled and remorseful, vowed never to take his love for granted again. Their journey to rebuild was arduous, but it was one they walked together hand in hand. And though the shadows of the past lingered, they found a way to let the light in, proving that even amidst the ruins of trust, love could bloom anew. Between loyalty and lies, the aftermath in. The months following Clara's confession, the Merrick household became a quieter place. Gone were the mornings filled with playful banter, replaced instead by a strained silence that neither Ethan nor Clara knew how to break. The small wooden table in their kitchen, once the heart of their home, now felt like a battleground. Ethan threw himself into his work, spending long hours in his workshop crafting ornate furniture that he sold to nearby towns. The rhythmic sound of his hammer striking wood was both a comfort and an escape. Yet, as much as he tried, he could not escape the image of Clara and Adrian beneath the old stone bridge. Clara, on the other hand, sought redemption in small, consistent gestures. She tended to the house with meticulous care, cooked Ethan's favorite meals, and even began helping at the village orphanage, a place she once passed by without a second glance. These acts of kindness were her way of proving to Ethan, and perhaps to herself, that she could be worthy of his love again. But trust is a delicate thing, and Ethan struggled to reconcile his feelings. One evening, as they sat in the dim glow of the fireplace, Clara broke the silence. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "do you think we can ever go back to how things were?" Ethan set down his mug, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to believe we can, but every time I look at you, I see him." Clara flinched at his words, but nodded. "I see him too," she whispered. "And I hate that I let him come between us. I hate that I betrayed you, and I hate myself for it." Ethan looked at her, the raw pain in her voice stirring something deep within him. "Do you regret what you did?" he asked. "Or do you regret getting caught?" Her eyes met his, unwavering. "I regret it all. Meeting him, lying to you, and most of all, breaking your heart. If I could take it back, I would." Ethan studied her, searching for any trace of deceit. He found none, only a woman who seemed as broken as he felt. It was then that he realized forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, a journey they would have to take together. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. They began attending the village's weekly gatherings again, presenting a united front, even as they worked through their private struggles. Clara suggested they see the town's elder, a wise woman named Agnes, who was known for her counsel. Ethan hesitated at first, wary of exposing their wounds to another, but eventually agreed. Agnes welcomed them into her modest home with a warm smile and a pot of herbal tea. She listened as they recounted their story, her kind eyes never judging, only understanding. "You are both brave," she said finally. "Brave to confront the truth, and even braver to stay and try to rebuild. But bravery alone won't mend your bond. You must relearn how to trust, how to communicate, and how to love." Agnes gave them tasks. Ethan was to write a letter to Clara, expressing his deepest feelings, both the love and the pain. Clara, in turn, was to write her own letter, detailing not only her remorse but her hopes for their future. The act of writing forced them to confront emotions they had kept buried, and when they exchanged letters, tears flowed freely. In time, the old stone bridge that once symbolized betrayal became a place of renewal. Ethan and Clara would walk there together, hand in hand, and talk about their dreams, fears, and everything in between. The shadow of Adrian faded, replaced by a newfound appreciation for the strength of their bond. Between loyalty and lies. The path to renewal spring arrived in Willow Bend, painting the town in hues of green and gold. The snowdrops blossomed first, delicate and hopeful, much like the tentative steps Ethan and Clara were taking toward mending their relationship. Ethan still carried a heaviness in his heart, but he could not deny the small moments of warmth that began to reemerge. It was in the way Clara lingered by his side in the evenings, or how she laughed again. Not the carefree laughter of before, but something gentler, more reflective. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across their home, Clara approached Ethan with an unexpected proposal. "Let's build something together," she said, her voice tinged with determination. Ethan, seated at his workbench, glanced up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Your work has always been a part of who you are," Clara said, her hands fidgeting. "I want to understand that part of you. Maybe if we create something together, we can start to rebuild what we've lost." Ethan considered her words, then nodded. "All right. What shall we make?" Clara's face lit up with a smile. "A hope chest," she said. "Something to remind us of what we're working toward." Over the following weeks, they toiled side by side in Ethan's workshop. He showed Clara how to sand the wood until it was smooth as glass, and how to carve intricate designs into its surface. Clara, though clumsy at first, quickly found joy in the craft. The chest began to take shape, its panels adorned with symbols that held meaning for them both: a willow tree for strength, a bridge for resilience, and a rising sun for hope. As they worked, they talked, not just about the pain of the past, but about their dreams for the future. Ethan shared his longing to expand his carpentry business, while Clara spoke of her newfound passion for helping at the orphanage. These conversations, once stilted and hesitant, grew natural and heartfelt. One afternoon, as they were fitting the chest's lid, Clara paused. "Ethan," she said softly, "I need to ask you something." He looked up from his work, his hand still holding a chisel. "What is it?" "Do you still love me?" Her voice wavered, and for a moment, the only sound was the chirping of birds outside. Ethan set down the chisel and stepped closer to her. "Clara," he began, his voice steady, "love doesn't just vanish, even when it's been hurt. I've struggled to trust you again, yes, but my love for you, it's still here. It's different now, more cautious perhaps, but it's real." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for his hand. "I love you too, Ethan, more than I ever understood before, and I'll keep working every day to show you that." By the time the hope chest was finished, it was a masterpiece, a testament to their efforts, not just as craftsmen, but as partners. They placed it in their bedroom, filling it with keepsakes: a letter Ethan had written to Clara during their courtship, a scarf she had knitted for him, and a lock of their daughter Lily's hair, who they had lost years ago, but whose memory united them in their grief. The chest became a symbol of their renewal, a tangible reminder of what they had endured and what they could achieve together. Over time, it grew to hold more memories, tokens of their rebuilt life and the love they rediscovered. The lesson of time. As years passed, Ethan and Clara's love matured into something deeper and more enduring. They learned to navigate disagreements with patience, to celebrate small victories, and to hold space for each other's fears and vulnerabilities. Trust, though fragile, grew stronger with every act of honesty and every shared moment. Their journey was not without setbacks. There were days when old wounds resurfaced, but instead of turning away, they faced them together. They had learned the most valuable lesson of all: love is not the absence of flaws, but the willingness to grow through them. And so, in the town of Willow Bend, beneath the shade of the willow tree and beside the old stone bridge, Ethan and Clara found not just forgiveness, but a renewed purpose, a love reborn from the ashes of betrayal. Between loyalty and lies, Adrian Locke, was no stranger to fleeting connections. As a traveling merchant, his life was one of perpetual motion, never rooted, always searching. He prided himself on his ability to read people, to understand their desires and fears. It was a skill that had made him successful in trade and, admittedly, in matters of the heart. When he first saw Clara at the market in Willow Bend, it wasn't her beauty that drew him in, though it was undeniable. It was the sadness behind her smile, the way her laughter seemed like a performance for the world, rather than a genuine expression of joy. Adrian had seen that look before, in Lonely Housewives and Restless Dreamers, and he knew he could offer her something she craved: escape. Their affair began as a game to him, a way to pass the time in a quiet town. He was careful, as he always was, to avoid entanglements. He promised her nothing and took nothing she wasn't willing to give. Yet, as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Adrian began to care. Clara was different from the women he usually encountered. There was a depth to her that intrigued him, a vulnerability that softened his cynicism. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself wondering what it might be like to stay, to build something lasting instead of leaving behind only memories and regrets. But Adrian's life had taught him that permanence was a luxury he could never afford. His charm and good looks masked a man burdened by a past he could never escape, a betrayal of his own that had set him on this restless path. And so, when Ethan confronted Clara and the whispers of their affair spread through the town, Adrian made the only choice he believed he could. He left. The road beyond. Willowbend. Adrian's departure from Willowbend was marked by a rare sense of regret. He knew he had caused pain, not just to Ethan, but to Clara as well. Yet he told himself he had only offered her what she sought. The choices were hers to make. In the months that followed, Adrian traveled farther than ever before, pushing the boundaries of his usual routes. He immersed himself in his work, trading silks and spices, avoiding towns like Willowbend, where the air was thick with stability and commitment. But no matter how far he went, he couldn't shake the memories of Clara's laughter or the look in Ethan's eyes when he realized the truth. One evening in a bustling port city, Adrian found himself in a tavern, nursing a glass of wine. A minstrel was performing a ballad about love and betrayal, and the haunting melody stirred something deep within him. As the song ended, Adrian leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, wondering if he would ever find a place or a person that made him want to stay. Redemption or resignation? Adrian's journey is one of reflection. Did he feel guilt for what he had done? Or did he view himself as a mere instrument of fate, bringing to light what was already fractured in Ethan and Clara's marriage? The question lingered like a shadow over his life, shaping his choices in subtle but profound ways. Years later, Adrian returned to Willowbend, not for Clara, but for closure. He kept to the edges of town, avoiding the familiar faces, and found himself at the old stone bridge. It was there that he left a letter, sealed and addressed to Ethan. In it, he wrote, "Ethan, I do not ask for forgiveness, for I know I am not owed it. But I want you to know that my actions were not born of malice. Clara is a remarkable woman, and in her, I saw a reflection of the restlessness I have carried my entire life. My presence in your lives caused pain, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I hope that in time, you and Clara have found a way to heal, to rebuild what was broken. I leave you with my apologies and my wishes for your happiness. Adrian Locke." Whether Ethan ever read the letter or cast it into the river, Adrian would never know. But as he walked away from Willowbend for the last time, he felt a strange sense of peace. Perhaps, he thought, redemption wasn't in being forgiven, but in acknowledging the harm and striving to do better. Between loyalty and lies, Clara's reflections, the air in Willowbend carried the scent of spring blooms and freshly tilled earth, but Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. She first heard the whispers in the market. Adrian Locke is back. The name, though unspoken in years, still carried weight. A name tied to her shame, her regret, and a version of herself she had fought to leave behind. She tried to dismiss the rumors, telling herself it didn't matter. Yet, as she stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunset over the hills, Clara felt the memories creeping in. The old stone bridge, the stolen laughter, the aching guilt that followed. It all came rushing back like a tide she could not hold back. "Clara?" Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was leaning against the doorframe, his expression calm yet observant. She forced a smile. "I'm fine." Ethan crossed the room and took her hand. "You've been quiet all day. Is it the rumors?" She hesitated, then nodded. "He's back." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his grip on her hand remained gentle. "He doesn't matter," he said, his voice steady. "Not anymore." But Clara knew it wasn't that simple. Adrian's return wasn't just about him. It was about the past she had worked so hard to bury, and the woman she no longer wanted to be. A walk by the bridge. That evening, unable to sleep, Clara slipped out of bed and wandered to the old stone bridge. It was a place of conflicting emotions for her, a symbol of both betrayal and redemption. As she stood there gazing at the moonlit water, she felt the weight of everything she had done and everything she had learned since. When Adrian had entered her life, she had been lost, yearning for something she couldn't even name. He had offered her an escape, but it was fleeting and hollow. It wasn't Adrian she had truly wanted. It was herself. A self she had rediscovered not through him, but through the pain of losing Ethan's trust and the hard work of rebuilding their love. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, she noticed something out of place, a small envelope resting on the bridge's stone railing. Her name wasn't on it, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. Adrian. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave the letter untouched and its contents unread. But another part, the part that had once sought closure in the darkest moments, reached for it. The letter she didn't expect opening the envelope. Clara found a simple note. It wasn't a declaration of love or an attempt to rekindle what they'd shared. Instead, it was an apology. Clara, I don't expect this note to erase the past, but I hope it brings you some peace. My time in Willow Bend was brief, but it left a mark on me, as I'm sure it did on you. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, not just to Ethan, but to you as well. I hope you've found the happiness you deserve. And I wish you and Ethan the best. Adrian Locke. Clara's hands trembled as she folded the letter. For years, she had wrestled with the guilt of her choices, the way they had hurt Ethan, and the way they had almost cost her everything. Adrian's words didn't absolve her, but they reminded her that she wasn't the same person who had made those choices. She stayed by the bridge for a while longer, letting the cool night air soothe her. When she finally returned home, Ethan was awake, sitting by the fire with a thoughtful expression. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and sat beside him, the letter still clutched in her hand. "I found this," she said, passing it to him. Ethan read it silently, his face unreadable. After a moment, he set it down. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice calm. Clara took a deep breath. "Lighter," she admitted. "It doesn't change what happened, but it feels like a chapter closing." Ethan nodded, reaching for her hand. "We've closed a lot of chapters together, and we'll keep writing new ones." For the first time since she heard the rumors, Clara felt a sense of peace. Adrian's return had stirred old wounds, but it had also reminded her of the strength she and Ethan had built. She leaned into his embrace, knowing that while the past would always be a part of their story, it didn't define their future. Between loyalty and lies, Adrian's farewell. The first light of dawn kissed the rooftops of Willow Bend as Adrian Locke tightened the straps on his satchel. He stood at the edge of the village, his horse grazing lazily beside him, the quiet hum of the waking town filling the air. For a moment he allowed himself to linger, soaking in the tranquility of a place he had once disrupted. Adrian's visit had been brief, by design. He knew his presence here would stir memories and emotions best left undisturbed. Yet, as he left the letters on the bridge and quietly visited the market one last time, he realized something had shifted within him. The guilt that had gnawed at his edges for years felt less sharp, replaced by a somber understanding. Some wounds can only be healed by time and distance. A man of restlessness, Adrian had always been a man in motion. The open road was his sanctuary, the towns and cities he passed through his temporary homes. He was skilled at reading people, at slipping into their lives just enough to leave a mark, but never enough to stay. It was a pattern born of necessity, or so he told himself. Staying meant roots, and roots meant vulnerability, something he had learned to avoid long ago. But Willow Bend had been different. Clara had been different. For the first time in years, he had seen the possibility of permanence, of a life beyond the transient connections that defined him. And yet, he had known even then that he wasn't meant to stay. Adrian Locke was a man built for passing through, not for building foundations. Reflections on the road, as he guided his horse down the winding forest path that led out of Willow Bend, Adrian allowed himself the luxury of reflection. The letters he had left, one for Ethan and one for Clara, had taken him weeks to write. Each word had been carefully chosen, not to absolve himself, but to offer them the closure he knew they deserved. Ethan had been a man of principle, steadfast and loyal, and Adrian respected him for it. He had seen the pain in Ethan's eyes that day on the bridge, a pain he knew he had caused. But Adrian also saw a strength in him, a strength that would rebuild what had been broken. Clara, on the other hand, had been a mirror to Adrian's own restlessness. She had sought something beyond the life she knew, just as he always had. But unlike Adrian, she had chosen to face her flaws and fight for what mattered. Her courage humbled him, and in her he saw the kind of strength he had always admired but never possessed. Perhaps, Adrian murmured to himself, it's time I learned to stop running. The road ahead. By the time the sun rose high in the sky, Adrian had reached a crossroads. One path led to the familiar, a route he had traveled countless times, to towns where his reputation preceded him, where the merchants and innkeepers knew him by name. The other path led to the unknown, winding through forests and mountains to places he had never seen. Adrian paused, his hand resting on the reins. For years, he had told himself that the unknown was where he thrived, that the thrill of discovery was what kept him moving. But now, he wondered if the unknown wasn't just an escape, a way to avoid facing the emptiness within him. With a resolute sigh, he turned his horse toward the unfamiliar path. If there was any hope of redemption, it wouldn't be found in repeating old patterns. It would be in carving a new path, one where he could finally learn to stay, not in a town or a place, but in his own skin. A new chapter. Adrian's departure from Willow Bend was not an ending, but a beginning. The letters he left behind were his way of closing one chapter, and the road ahead was his chance to write a new one. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the pull of the past or the weight of regret. Instead, he felt the faint stirrings of hope, a hope that perhaps one day he could become the kind of man who didn't need to run. And so, as the forest closed around him and the village faded from view, Adrian Locke rode on. Not as a man escaping his past, but as a man searching for a future worth staying for. Between loyalty and lies, the new horizons of Adrian Locke. The narrow forest path wound through ancient oaks and pines, their branches forming a natural archway that whispered of secrets untold. Adrian's horse trotted steadily, its hooves muffled by the mossy ground. He carried with him little more than his satchel, a map worn thin with years of use, and a flickering hope that this journey would be different. For the first few days, the road was quiet. Adrian avoided the bustling towns he once frequented, stopping instead at small hamlets where the faces were unfamiliar, and his name carried no weight. The anonymity was refreshing, a chance to redefine himself without the burden of his past. The stranger in Eldermere. On the 10th day of his travels, Adrian arrived in Eldermere, a village nestled at the base of the Silver Peak Mountains. The air was crisp, the scent of wildflowers mingling with the tang of pine. Eldermere was a modest place, just a cluster of cottages, a tavern, and a market square, but it thrummed with life. Adrian was used to being an observer, slipping in and out of towns without leaving a trace. But something about Eldermere invited him to linger. Perhaps it was the warmth of the villagers or the way the mountains seemed to cradle the town, offering both protection and a challenge. At the tavern that evening, Adrian found himself drawn into conversation with the locals. They spoke of their lives with a simplicity that fascinated him, a blacksmith proud of his craft, a baker who sang while kneading dough, a shepherd who knew each of his sheep by name. These were people who stayed, who built lives in one place. Adrian couldn't remember the last time he had felt such contentment in the company of strangers. A chance encounter. The following morning, as Adrian explored the outskirts of Eldermere, he stumbled upon a young woman struggling to repair a broken wagon wheel. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose braid, and her face was streaked with dirt, but her expression was one of determination. "Need a hand?" Adrian offered, dismounting from his horse. The woman looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Depends. Can you hold a hammer without breaking the wheel further?" Adrian chuckled. "I've handled worse." Together they worked to fix the wheel, Adrian offering his strength and steady hands while the woman directed the effort. As they worked, she introduced herself as Lila, a tinker's daughter who traveled between villages selling wares. Her sharp wit and unshakable resolve reminded Adrian of someone he once knew, perhaps a younger version of himself, before life had taught him to guard his heart. When the wheel was finally repaired, Lila offered him a grateful smile. "You're not from around here," she said. "What brings you to Eldermere?" Adrian hesitated. "I'm looking for something. Not sure what yet." Lila studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, whatever it is, I hope you find it." A new purpose. In the weeks that followed, Adrian found himself drawn deeper into the life of Eldermere. He helped the blacksmith forge tools, lent his skills to the carpenter repairing a barn, and even accompanied Lila on a few of her journeys to nearby villages. Each task, though small, felt meaningful in a way that his old life never had. One evening, as the villagers gathered for a festival, Adrian stood on the edge of the square, watching the children dance and the elders laugh around the bonfire. Lila approached, a mug of cider in her hand. "You've been here longer than most strangers stay," she remarked, her tone light but curious. Adrian nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I used to think staying meant being trapped, but now I'm starting to see it differently." Lila tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe you just needed the right place." Seeds of belonging. Adrian's time in Eldermere was not without challenges. The habits of a lifetime, his restlessness, his tendency to keep people at arm's length, didn't fade overnight. But with every day he stayed, every connection he forged, he felt a little more grounded. One afternoon, while repairing a fence with the blacksmith, the man said something that struck Adrian deeply. "Belonging isn't about where you are," the blacksmith mused. "It's about what you give to the place you're in." Adrian carried those words with him, letting them guide his choices. For the first time, he wasn't just passing through. He was giving, contributing, and in doing so, finding a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. The journey continues. Though Adrian's path was far from complete, his time in Eldermere marked the beginning of a transformation. He learned to stay, to build, and to care, not just for others but for himself. And as he watched the seasons change in the shadow of the Silver Peak Mountains, he began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, redemption wasn't something you found. It was something you earned, one small act at a time. Between loyalty and lies, bonds forged in Eldermere. Adrian's growing ties to the people of Eldermere were as unexpected as they were profound. For a man who had spent years drifting through life, the connections he was building in the village felt like roots threading into fertile soil. Each relationship carried its own lessons, slowly reshaping the man he was into the man he hoped to become. The blacksmith. Lessons in forging strength. Kieran, the blacksmith, was the first to truly draw Adrian into the heart of Eldermere's community. A broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh and a talent for reading people, Kieran had a knack for coaxing Adrian into conversations that went deeper than surface pleasantries. "You've got a good eye for detail," Kieran said one day as they shaped iron into horseshoes. Ever worked a forge before? Adrian shook his head. Not unless you count fixing things on the road. Fixing things counts for plenty, Kieran replied, his tone approving. A man's worth isn't in how many places he's been. It's in what he leaves behind. Kieran's words lingered long after the day's work was done. The blacksmith wasn't just teaching Adrian the art of shaping metal, he was teaching him the value of patience, discipline, and craftsmanship, not just in work, but in life. Lila, a partnership of equals. If Kieran was a mentor, Lila was an equal, a challenge and a companion rolled into one. Her sharp wit and unshakable resolve pushed Adrian in ways he hadn't expected. Their shared journeys to nearby villages became more than simple errands. They became moments of discovery and growth. Do you ever miss the road? Adrian asked her one evening as they camped by the fire. Not the road itself, Lila said, poking at the embers with a stick. But I miss the freedom it gave me. Every stop was a chance to start fresh. Adrian nodded, understanding her sentiment. I used to think that too. But now, I'm starting to wonder if freedom isn't about running. Maybe it's about choosing to stay. Lila's eyes softened as she looked at him. Staying takes courage, Adrian. More than leaving ever will. Their conversations wove a bond between them, one rooted in mutual respect and an understanding of each other's journeys. Lila was unlike anyone Adrian had ever known, unafraid to challenge him, yet willing to stand by him as he found his way. The children of Eldermere, innocence and renewal. Among the most unexpected relationships Adrian formed were with the village children. At first, they regarded him with wide-eyed curiosity, whispering and giggling whenever he passed. But as he stayed and helped with chores around the village, they began to warm to him. One day, while repairing the fence around the schoolhouse, a boy named Thomas approached him. Mr. Adrian, is it true you've been everywhere? Adrian smiled, crouching to the boy's level. Not everywhere, but I've seen a lot of places. Tell us a story, Thomas exclaimed, and soon a group of children had gathered around him, their eager faces shining with anticipation. Adrian hesitated. Storytelling had never been his forte, but as he began to weave tales of far-off lands and daring adventures, he found himself enjoying their laughter and wonder. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, as though his past, flawed as it was, had something to offer. A test of trust. Not all relationships came easily. There were villagers who eyed Adrian with suspicion, questioning his motives for staying. Among them was Marta, an elder who had lived in Eldermere her entire life. "You're not like the others," she said one day, as Adrian helped her gather herbs. "Drifters don't stay, and when they do, it's because they want something." Adrian met her gaze, unflinching. "I won't lie, Marta. I've spent my life running, from places, from people, even from myself, but I'm trying to change. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'd like to try." Marta studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We'll see, Adrian Locke. Actions speak louder than words." Her cautious acceptance was a reminder that trust wasn't given freely. It was earned, and Adrian was determined to earn it, not just from Marta but from the entire village. Finding his place. As the weeks turned to months, Adrian's relationships deepened. The bonds he forged were not just with the people of Eldermere, but with the land, the rhythm of the seasons, and the simple joys of a life lived fully. For the first time, he wasn't just passing through. He was part of something larger than himself. Yet, even as he grew closer to the villagers, questions lingered in his mind. Was this truly where he belonged, or was it another stop on his journey? Could a man with a past like his ever truly be at peace? Adrian didn't have all the answers, but for now that was enough. He was learning that belonging wasn't about knowing, It was about trying. Between loyalty and lies, Adrian's transformation, and the challenges ahead. As Adrian grew stronger in his craft and deeper in his relationships, he was also becoming more aware of the delicate balance he had to strike between the life he had left behind and the one he was building in Eldermere. The true test of his transformation would not come from the forge or his work with Kieran, but from the inner battles he would face as he allowed the walls around his heart to crumble. The challenge of staying. In the months that followed, Adrian's transformation became more evident to the villagers. He no longer carried the air of a wanderer, of someone who might slip away at a moment's notice. Yet despite his outwardly steady demeanor, there remained moments of doubt, those quiet, unspoken fears that gnawed at him in the stillness of the night. Kieran noticed the hesitation one morning as they worked side by side in the forge, shaping a new batch of tools. "You're a good worker, Adrian," Kieran said, his voice low but firm. "But you're not all in yet, are you?" Adrian froze for a moment, the hammer in his hand still. "What do you mean?" "You've learned the craft," Kieran said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But the people here, they need to know they can trust you, not just to fix their fences or repair their wagons, but to be here when things get hard." Adrian's gaze dropped to the anvil, the weight of Kieran's words settling on his chest. For the first time, he realized the true weight of the life he was trying to build. It wasn't just about fixing the broken things. It was about staying in the moments of struggle, when it would be so much easier to leave. "I'm trying," Adrian muttered, his voice thick with uncertainty. Kieran's eyes softened. "Trying isn't enough. You've got to decide. Are you going to be a man of the road, or are you going to be a man of this place?" Facing the past. The past had a way of catching up with Adrian, as it often does with those who try to outrun it. One evening, as Adrian sat at the tavern with Kieran and Lila, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway. It was Nathaniel, Adrian's older brother, a man whose face carried the same sharp features, but a hardness Adrian had never quite understood. Nathaniel's sudden appearance in Eldermere sent ripples through Adrian's soul, bringing back a flood of memories from a time he had tried to forget. "Nathaniel," Adrian greeted him cautiously, his voice tight with the years of silence between them. Kieran and Lila both looked between the two men, sensing the tension but saying nothing. Nathaniel stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Adrian. "I've been looking for you." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. "Why? What do you want?" Nathaniel's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "It's about the family. There's been word from home. Things are changing. I thought you should know." The words stung, but it wasn't just the news from home that unsettled Adrian. It was the way his brother still held that power over him. The history between them was fraught with betrayal, competition, and old wounds that had never fully healed. "Why now?" Adrian asked, his voice trembling despite his attempt to remain composed. "I didn't know where else to go," Nathaniel admitted. "You always ran, Adrian, but you're here now, and I need you." The heart of the matter. The encounter with Nathaniel left Adrian feeling conflicted. It was a reminder of the ties that bound him to a past he had worked so hard to leave behind. Yet, as he reflected on his brother's words, Adrian began to see them for what they truly were, a test of his growth. Kieran noticed his unease later that evening when Adrian returned to the forge. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Kieran said, his voice gentle. Adrian let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. "My brother's here. He wants me to return home." Kieran didn't ask for details, but simply nodded. "Sometimes the past has a way of calling you back, but that doesn't mean you have to answer." Adrian looked up at him, his brow furrowed. What if there's something I've left unfinished? What if going back is the only way to make things right? Kieran leaned on his hammer, his gaze thoughtful. "You can't fix the past, Adrian. but you can decide how you want to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The blacksmith's words settled in Adrian's heart, but the decision wasn't easy. Could he truly leave behind the responsibilities that still loomed over him from his past? Or would he find a way to reconcile his old life with the new one he had created in Eldermere? A crossroads of the heart. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Adrian worked the forge with more intensity than ever, throwing himself into the rhythm of the craft to drown out the questions swirling in his mind. But the reality was inescapable. He was at a crossroads.